how's this? Here's another example. Here you have, in what would be termed egocentric languages, like English, you refer to directions with respect to your body. It's over there, you say, indicating where it is with respect to your body. Where's that person standing? Just behind him. What you see in a lot of other languages, less egocentric ones, is directions are entirely a function of external landmarks. And thus, in a bunch of Aboriginal languages in Australia, you can't say something like, ooh, my right foot is on fire. You can only say, ooh, my foot that's to the northwest is on fire. The world is based by external landmarks rather than ones that are internal. A great example I heard of this from Leah Boroditsky. Oh no, I just mispronounced her name, I'm sure, and that's shameful given that it's a Russian name like mine. But in any case, in the psychology department, and telling me this great example that you get in some of these non-ego language ones. Okay, we tend to think of stories going from left to right. If you give somebody a bunch of tiles, which is part of the frequent IQ tests for kids, and they make a story, if you put them in the right sequence, in English, what we do is we put the first scene on the left and it moves to the right from there. Stories progress from left to right. What you see in these languages that are based by external cues is stories begin in the east, because that's where the sun rises. So if you were sitting facing south, and you were given the tiles, you would put the story starting over here, because that's where the sun comes up. And if you were sitting instead facing north, you would place the tiles starting from the right to left, because the only pertinent direction is nothing with respect to where your body is, where your arms are. Directions, things start in the east, and that determines things far more than your body's orientation. Classic, very non-ego-centered directionality in a language. So that is very frequent. So what begins to be intrinsic in all of this is the notion that language shapes the way you think. And this harks back to a grand old theory in linguistics and language acquisition from two guys early in the 20th century, Sapir and Whorf, and the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis being that language constrains thought. That your capacity for thinking, the way in which you think, is constrained by the language that you have been taught, the language you speak, and that has been debated endlessly in terms of just how much evidence is there for that versus how much the style of thought shape what the language is. This has endlessly been debated, and it's one of the sort of hallmarks of what linguistics is about. In the last decade, two traditional populations in the Amazon that were studied that are viewed as giving really major support for a strict Sapir-Whorf notion that your capacity for thought, the nature of your thought, is deeply shaped, potentially deeply constrained by language. So these two tribes, the first is called the Piraha, and the other is called the Munduruku, I believe. And what you have in both of them is a very different number system than we have, than virtually every westernized society does. In the first group, the Piraha, their number system consists of three numbers: 1, 2, and something bigger than 2. In Munduruku, it's essentially the same thing, but it's 5 terms. It goes up to 6 terms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all other numbers that are bigger than 5. And I don't know completely what that suggests about how often you have to count stuff down there, but what it suggests is this is going to be a very different relationship with numbers, and what they show, studies with these folks, is doing mathematical computations, doing estimates, doing everything in the second tribe with numbers up to 5, the exact same level of accuracy as would a westernized individual. But get above 5 and accuracy goes down the drain. Somebody in that society has a huge amount of trouble telling the difference between 6 objects and 8 objects. 8 objects and 10 objects, because they all get bucketed as how many are there. It's the number that means more than 5. And in the first group, you see the same exact thing for any number above 3. There's a lot of trouble being accurate distinguishing 3 from 4 from 5 and so on, because they all have the same term. They are that number that is bigger than 2. all of that occurring once you get above those numbers, guesses essentially at the chance level. So that's kind of impressive and very interesting, but maybe there's always this potential kind of counter-interpretation as to what's happening there, which is maybe these are not terribly sharp folks there, and maybe have had all sorts of issues with protein malnutrition or cerebral malaria or God knows what. No, because in each of these populations, each of these cultures, they know thousands of different types of edible plants and medicinal plants. These are enormously sophisticated people. In those realms, numbers just aren't a big deal. And what you see is somebody growing up in that society who has not invented the language, but are instead acquiring it. It constrains their ability to tell the difference between the numbers 3 and 4. Very shaping in that regard. So all sorts of people debating endlessly how much does language shape the way you think, how much does thinking shape the sort of language you come up with. But at the end of the day, there's this whole sort of philosophical business that no matter how similar the language is that you're using with someone else, it's going to mean something slightly different to you. And